There is a moment that almost no one recognizes while it is happening, because it doesn't feel like progress, and it certainly doesn't look like a comeback. It feels quiet, sometimes confusing, sometimes disappointingly ordinary. The mind expects change to announce itself with energy, confidence, or visible improvement, but internal change never works that way. What actually shifts first is invisible. Long before circumstances improve, something inside stops cooperating with the version of you that used to survive by repetition. The unconscious begins to move before the mind can name what is happening. Old reactions lose their urgency. Old triggers don't hit with the same force. Habits that once felt automatic start to feel slightly unnatural, as if they no longer fully belong to you. This phase often feels anticlimactic because nothing dramatic replaces what is leaving. There is just space. And space, at first, feels like absence rather than progress. But this is how real change always begins. Your comeback did not start when things improved. It started the moment you stopped being who you were, even if you didn't yet know who you were becoming. Most people stay trapped not because they lack strength, but because they are caught in loops that feel familiar enough to mistake for identity. Emotional cycles repeat themselves quietly. The same expectations, the same disappointments, the same internal negotiations. The mind calls this normal, even when it is exhausting. What keeps the loop alive is not intensity, but restart. As long as the cycle can begin again, it will. The true shift happens when something inside refuses to reset the pattern, not with rebellion, with fatigue. Exhaustion is often misunderstood as weakness, but psychologically, it is frequently the signal that an old chapter no longer has the energy to continue. There comes a point when repeating the same emotional movement costs more than stepping into the unknown. That is the moment the loop weakens. You may notice it as a quiet inner refusal, a subtle unwillingness to explain yourself again, to tolerate the same dynamics, to betray the same boundaries. Nothing explodes, nothing resolves overnight, but the cycle cannot fully restart. And when a pattern loses the ability to repeat itself, change is already in motion, even if nothing else has caught up yet. This is often the stage where people believe they are falling apart. Motivation fades. Old desires lose their pull. What once mattered feels strangely distant. The mind interprets this detachment as loss, or worse, failure. But detachment is not collapse. It is separation. When something no longer belongs to you, it begins to loosen its grip before anything new takes its place. This can feel like numbness, but numbness here is not emptiness. It is a transition. The nervous system is recalibrating. Emotional intensity drops because you are no longer feeding the same internal structures. Space appears before direction. Silence comes before clarity. The mind wants to rush this phase, to label it, to fix it, to replace it with something recognizable. But this in-between state is necessary. You cannot hear where you are going while the noise of who you were is still playing. What feels like disintegration is often just the process of letting go without yet reaching for the next identity. You are not losing yourself. You are releasing what no longer fits. At some point, a deeper discomfort appears, one that has nothing to do with circumstances and everything to do with identity. You realize, sometimes with grief, sometimes with relief, that you cannot return to who you were. Real comebacks do not restore old versions. They invalidate them. The mind often resists this because familiarity feels safer than growth, even when familiarity was painful. Outgrowing an identity can feel like betrayal, as if you are abandoning a version of yourself that once kept you alive. But identity is not fixed. It updates quietly through choices, through tolerances you no longer have, through standards you no longer negotiate. You may notice yourself making decisions that surprise you, declining things you once accepted, moving away from dynamics you once chased. This is not inconsistency. It is evidence that your self-concept is changing ahead of conscious intention. Your future self is already making decisions for you, even if your mind has not caught up to the narrative yet. This is not a return to your old life. It is an arrival into one that could not exist until the old version loosened its hold. One of the most destabilizing parts of this phase is how little evidence there seems to be. The mind demands proof. It wants visible progress, external validation, something concrete to point to and say, "This is working." But the most important work leaves no immediate trace. Internal rewiring does not show up as instant success. Emotional boundaries do not announce themselves. Pattern breaks do not come with applause. This is why patience becomes essential, not as passive waiting, but as stabilization. If you quit during the silent phase, you don't just stop progress, you interrupt a process that was already carrying you forward. Momentum exists long before it becomes visible. Just because you cannot see it does not mean it has stopped. In fact, the phase where progress feels invisible is often the most critical, because this is when old habits are weakest and new ones are not yet rigid. Interfering here, rushing, forcing outcomes, or reverting to old strategies can pull you back into a loop that was already losing power. There is also a reason certain messages seem to find you at very specific moments. Not every idea reaches everyone at the same time. Some insights only land when the internal conditions are right. The unconscious recognizes readiness long before awareness does. That is why timing feels personal, not mystical, but precise. When you encounter something that does not motivate you, does not excite you, but simply confirms what you have already been sensing, it is usually because a threshold has already been crossed. This kind of message does not push you forward. It marks where you already are. It appears when return is no longer truly possible, even if your mind still imagines it as an option. You are not being called into something new. You are being acknowledged for something that is already underway. At this stage, the most important discipline is not effort, but restraint. Forcing outcomes now often disrupts natural recovery. Trying to accelerate the process, to define it too early, to control its direction, can reactivate the very patterns that were dissolving. Alignment unfolds best when it is not rushed. This does not mean doing nothing. It means not sabotaging what is already moving by demanding it prove itself prematurely. The calm discipline here is learning not to interfere, not to overcorrect, not to panic in the absence of immediate confirmation. Trust is not blind belief. It is the recognition that something real is already happening beneath the surface. Your comeback is not a future event waiting to start. It is already in motion. And your only task now is simple, though not always easy. To not stop it by trying to force it into a shape your past self would recognize. As this movement continues, you may notice something that feels almost unsettling in its simplicity. Life begins to respond not with dramatic changes, but with subtle alignment. Situations that once pulled you into reaction lose their grip. Conversations feel shorter, cleaner, less charged. You find yourself less available for dynamics that once consumed you, not because you are trying to be disciplined, but because something inside no longer engages. This is often mistaken for withdrawal or indifference, but it is neither. It is discernment forming without effort. When a pattern no longer fits your internal structure, it stops activating you. The nervous system does not light up the same way. You are not suppressing response. You simply do not generate it anymore. This is one of the clearest signs that a real internal shift has already occurred. The absence of reaction is not emptiness, it is resolution. With this comes a strange recalibration of energy. You may feel less driven, less urgent, less compelled to prove or explain yourself. To the mind, this can feel dangerous, as if momentum is being lost. But what is actually happening is conservation. Energy that was once spent maintaining old loops, old defenses, old internal arguments is now unassigned. It has nowhere to go yet. This unassigned energy can feel like flatness or boredom at first, because it is no longer feeding familiar narratives. Many people panic here and rush to refill the space with goals, distractions, or urgency. But this pause is not a problem. It is the reset point where new momentum begins to organize itself naturally. Momentum that is not fueled by fear or compensation takes longer to appear, but it is far more stable once it does. Another quiet change emerges in how you relate to effort. Earlier, effort felt necessary to keep things from falling apart. You pushed, managed, controlled, corrected. Now, effort becomes more selective. You still act, but action feels cleaner, less desperate. You are no longer trying to outrun collapse or prove recovery. Action begins to arise from clarity rather than urgency. This is why progress can feel slower even as it becomes more effective. You are no longer scattering energy across multiple directions. You are waiting, often unconsciously, for alignment before committing movement. This waiting is not hesitation. It is precision developing. At this stage, doubt can resurface, not because something is wrong, but because the old internal reference points are gone. The mind asks, if I'm not pushing, who am I? This question does not require an answer. It dissolves on its own as lived experience replaces narrative. Identity no longer needs to be defined in advance. It updates through action, through boundaries you now hold without explanation, through standards you maintain without guilt. You begin to trust behavior more than self-talk. What you repeatedly choose becomes more informative than what you tell yourself you intend. This is how the new identity stabilizes without ever being formally declared. You may also notice a growing intolerance for self-betrayal. Things you once tolerated out of habit or fear now register immediately as misalignment. Not with emotional drama, but with a clear internal signal that something is off. This signal is not anxiety, it is clarity. It does not ask you to react impulsively. It simply refuses to let you ignore reality. This refusal is quiet but firm. It is one of the strongest indicators that the old version of you is no longer available to return. You are not trying to be stronger. You are simply no longer willing to abandon yourself to preserve familiarity. As this stabilizes, life often begins to mirror the change in understated ways, not through instant success, but through reduction of friction, fewer unnecessary conflicts, fewer repeated disappointments, fewer situations that drain you without offering growth. This does not mean life becomes easy. It means it becomes more honest. What remains now has relevance. What falls away was already finished internally. External change lags behind internal change, but it always follows the same direction. The key difference now is that you are no longer waiting for evidence to grant yourself permission to trust the process. Trust emerges because your experience is consistent, not because outcomes are perfect. There is also a deepening sense of irreversibility that settles in quietly. You may still imagine going back, but the imagination lacks conviction. The body knows something the mind is still adjusting to. The old configuration no longer functions. Even if you tried to force yourself into past patterns, they would feel hollow, strained, unsustainable. This is not growth as expansion. It is growth as shedding. What cannot be carried forward drops away naturally. You are not burning bridges. You are simply walking past doors that no longer open from the inside. This is where patience becomes less of a virtue and more of a byproduct. You are not waiting because you are unsure. You are waiting because you can feel movement happening without your interference. Rushing would only distort what is forming. Intervening prematurely would pull you back into control strategies that belong to an earlier stage. The discipline now is subtle, allowing things to take shape without forcing definition, allowing direction to emerge from alignment rather than anxiety. This kind of patience is not passive, it is attentive. You are present enough to notice when movement is required, and calm enough to refrain when it is not. Eventually, what felt like a fragile phase reveals itself as stable ground. Not because life has settled, but because you have. You are no longer measuring progress by intensity or speed. You are measuring it by coherence, by how little inner contradiction you experience, by how rarely you have to convince yourself to act in your own best interest, by how naturally your choices reflect what you already know. This is not a dramatic comeback story. It is a quiet return to alignment that makes drama unnecessary. If this part of the journey feels understated, even anticlimactic, that is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that the shift is real. Real change rarely announces itself. It integrates. And once integrated, it does not require maintenance through effort or belief. It sustains itself through consistency. Your comeback is not something you need to declare, explain, or defend. It is something that is already shaping your behavior, your tolerance, and your direction. Nothing needs to be forced now. Nothing needs to be chased. The movement is already happening. And the most powerful thing you can do at this point is continue to let it.